Welcome to chapter 14 of the picture of Dorian Gray. You may remember that in chapter 13 we had the terrible, bloody murder of Basil Hallward in the schoolroom up at the top of Dorian Gray's house, the climax of the novel in my view. And now, of course, we have this body still sitting up there. And the main thing in this chapter is really how does Dorian dispose of the body, and he calls in an old friend who's a scientist to make the body disappear. He blackmails this scientist in doing so. The scientist's name is Alan Campbell, who I guess this picture is meant to represent. The other important thing is, Alan Campbell doesn't want to help Dorian. There's evidently something in their history, and we're not told what it is. And Dorian uses something in their history to blackmail this Alan Campbell into disposing of the body for him. So, of course, this tells us that Dorian's been very busy. Whatever the scandal is about, Dorian's not been sitting at home, twiddling his thumbs. So let's have a look at chapter 14. Ironically, after this night of horror, Dorian wakes up to a cup of hot chocolate brought by his servant. At 9 o'clock the next morning, his servant came in with a cup of chocolate on a tray and opened the shutters. Dorian was sleeping quite peacefully, lying on his right side, with one hand underneath his cheek. He looked like a boy who had been tired out with play or study. How ironic, considering he's a murderer now. And as he opens his eyes, there's a faint smile passing across his lips, as though he'd been lost in some delightful dream. Yet he had not dreamed at all. His night had been untroubled by any images of pleasure or of pain. But youth smiles without any reason. It is one of its chiefest charms. He looked round, and leaning upon his elbow, began to sip his chocolate. Gradually the events of the preceding night crept with silent, blood-stained feet into his brain, and reconstructed themselves there with terrible distinctness. He winced, he pulled a face at the memory of all that he had suffered. And of course he's murdered someone, yet he's pulling faces now because of his suffering. So I think he's being a bit selfish here. And for a moment, the same curious feeling of loathing or hatred for Basil Hallward that had made him kill him as he sat in the chair came back to him, and he grew cold with passion. We usually grow hot with passion. This is, I guess, how you feel if you've murdered. The dead man was still sitting there too, and in the sunlight now. How horrible that was. Such hideous things were for the darkness, not for the day. This was a thing to be driven out of the mind, to be drugged with poppies. Opium is from poppies. To be strangled, lest or unless it might strangle one itself. So he dresses himself with even more than his usual care, giving a good deal of attention to the choice of his necktie and scarf pin, and changing his rings more than once. And this also seems a bit odd. So he looks at his letters and tears one up with a look of annoyance in his face. Oh, that awful thing, a woman's memory, as Lord Henry had once said. So this is some other romantic activity of Dorian's, that a letter's coming about. Some woman who he's now not in contact with. So he writes this letter, gives it to the servant, take it to 152 Hertford Street, Francis, and if Mr. Campbell is out of town, get his address. He doesn't want to think about Basil Hallward. A nice reading. I see another character is mentioned here, Adrian Singleton, who's given him something. There's also something happened with Adrian Singleton. We're going to bump into Adrian Singleton towards the end. In a book given to Dorian by Adrian, there's this poem about Venice in French, and how beautiful it is, and as one read it, one seemed to be floating down the green waterways of the pink and pearl city, seated in a black gondola, trailing curtains. Also strange to be reading about beautiful Venice straight after the murder, and perhaps this is a sign of his hedonism once again, his pursuit of pleasure. More reading about Venice, and he mentions Basil here. Basil has been with him to Venice, it seems, and poor Basil, what a horrible way for a man to die. He sighed and took up the volume again, carries on reading, and thinks about this Alan Campbell again. What if he should be out of England? Days would elapse before he would come back. Perhaps he might refuse to come. What could he do then? Every moment was of vital importance. They had been great friends once, years before, almost inseparable indeed. Then the intimacy had come suddenly to an end. Of course, that intimacy could be the intimacy between friends, but something happened there. And now, when they met in society now, it was only Dorian Gray who smiled. Alan Campbell never did. So whatever happened, Alan Campbell's not pleased about. And this Alan Campbell's dominant intellectual passion was for science. They, strangely enough, met over music when the pianist Arthur Rubinstein was playing at Lady Berkshire's. So it's music that brought them together, but also, of course, Dorian's charisma, his magnetism, that indefinable attraction that Dorian seemed to be able to exercise whenever he wished, and indeed exercised often without being conscious of it. This Alan Campbell, Dorian Gray seemed so wonderful and fascinating. We're not sure did a quarrel take place between them, but suddenly people remarked that they scarcely spoke when they met, and that Campbell always seemed to go away early from any party at which Dorian Gray was present. He had changed too, was strangely melancholy or sad at times, appeared almost to dislike hearing music. This was the man Dorian Gray was waiting for. Every second he kept glancing at the clock. As the minutes went by, he became horribly agitated. At last he got up and began to pace up and down the room, looking like a beautiful caged thing. He took long, healthy strides. His hands were curiously cold. The suspense became unbearable. Time seemed to him to be crawling with feet of lead. At last the door opened and his servant entered. "Mr. Campbell, sir." A sigh of relief broke from his parched lips, and the colour came back to his cheeks. "Ask him to come in at once, Francis." Alan comes in. He's looking stern or serious and rather pale. Even more pale because of his black hair and dark eyebrows. Dorian says, "Alan, this is kind of you. I thank you for coming. I had intended never to enter your house again, Gray." Just calling him by the surname tells you his attitude towards Dorian now. "But you said it was a matter of life and death," in the note, evidently. There was a look of contempt or hatred in the steady, searching gaze that he turned on Dorian. So, again, we're not sure what happened, but it wasn't pretty. The two men's eyes met. In Dorian's there was infinite pity. He feels sorry for Alan. Why? He knew that what he was going to do was dreadful. To force this Alan to dispose of the body. There's Alan in a locked room at the top of this house, a room to which nobody but myself has access. A dead man is seated at a table. He has been dead 10 hours now. Don't stir, and don't look at me like that. Who the man is, why he died, how he died, are matters that do not concern you. What you have to do is this: stop Gray. I don't want to know anything further. Whether what you've told me is true or not true doesn't concern me. I entirely decline to be mixed up in your life. Keep your horrible secrets to yourself. They don't interest me anymore. They'll have to interest you. I'm awfully sorry for you, Alan, but I can't help myself. You are the one man who is able to save me. I'm forced to bring you into the matter. I have no option, Alan. You are scientific. You know about chemistry and things of that kind. What you've got to do is destroy the thing that is upstairs. Destroy it, so that not a vestige or tiny little bit of it will be left. Nobody saw this person come into the house. Indeed, at the present moment, he's supposed to be in Paris. He will not be missed for months. When he is missed, there must be no trace of him found here. You, Alan, you must change him into nothing. And everything that you must change him and everything that belongs to him into a handful of ashes that I may scatter in the air. You mad, Dorian. I was waiting for you to call me Dorian instead of just Grey. You're mad, I tell you. Mad to imagine that I would raise a finger to help you. Mad to make this monstrous confession. I will have nothing to do with this matter, whatever it is. Do you think I'm going to peril my reputation for you? What is it to me what devil's work you're up to? It was suicide, Alan. I'm glad of that, but who drove him to it? You, I should fancy. Do you still refuse to do this for me? Of course I refuse. I'll have absolutely nothing to do with it. I don't care what shame comes on you. You deserve it all. I should not be sorry to see you disgraced, publicly disgraced. Go to some of your friends. Don't come to me. Alan, it was murder. I killed him. You don't know what he had made me suffer. And I suppose he did indirectly in doing the painting, but other than that, I think Dorian's being self-absorbed again. Murder, good God, Dorian, is that what you've come to? So I think, did I miss highlighting something? Well, he's told him, yeah, it was murder, I killed him. Murder? Is that what you've come to? I shall not inform upon you, but I will have nothing to do with it. You must have something to do with it. Wait a moment. Listen to me. Only listen, Alan. All I ask of you is to perform a certain scientific experiment. You go to hospitals and dead houses, and the horrors that you do there don't affect you. If in some hideous dissecting room or fetid or smelly laboratory you found this man lying on a leaden table with red gutters scooped out in it for the blood to flow through, you would simply look upon him as an admirable subject. You would not turn a hair. You wouldn't be shocked if this were in a hospital. I've no desire to help you. You forget that. I'm simply indifferent to the whole thing. I don't care one way or the other. It has nothing to do with me. We were friends once, Alan. Don't speak about those days, Dorian. They are dead. I absolutely refuse to do anything in the matter. It's insane of you to ask me. You refuse? Yes. I entreat you, I beg you, Alan. It is useless. And this is where Dorian pulls out the blackmail card. The same look of pity came into Dorian Gray's eyes. Then he stretched out his hand, took a piece of paper, and wrote something on it. And we never find out what he writes there, but whatever it is, it convinces Alan. He read it over twice, folded it carefully, and pushed it across the table. Having done this, he got up and went over to the window. Campbell looked at him in surprise and then took up the paper and opened it. As he read it, his face became ghastly pale, and he fell back in his chair. A horrible sense of sickness came over him. He felt as if his heart was beating itself to death in some empty hollow. Dorian says, I'm so sorry for you, Alan, but you leave me no alternative. I have a letter written already. Here it is. You see the address? If you don't help me, I must send it. He's going to tell a secret of Alan's to someone. If you don't help me, I'll send it. You know what the result will be. But you're going to help me. It's impossible for you to refuse now. Campbell buried his face in his hands, and a shudder passed through him. Come, don't work yourself into this fever. The thing has to be done. Face it and do it. Poor old Alan feels as if an iron ring was being slowly tightened round his forehead, as if the disgrace with which he was threatened, if Dorian sends that letter, he will be disgraced. He's acting as if that disgrace had already come upon him. You have no choice. I'll have to go home and get some things from the laboratory. No, Alan, you must not leave the house. Write out on a sheet of notepaper what you want, and my servant will take a cab and bring the things back to you. And poor Dorian's eyes are filled with tears. He's feeling so sorry. Or actually, maybe the tears are because he says, hush, Alan, you've saved my life. Alan says, your life? Good heavens. What a life that is. You've gone from corruption to corruption. Now you have culminated in crime. In doing what I'm going to do, what you force me to do, it is not of your life that I'm thinking. Dorian says, I wish you had 1,000th part of the pity for me that I have for you. After about 10 minutes, a knock came in the door, and the servant entered carrying a large mahogany chest of chemicals with a long coil of steel and platinum wire and two rather curiously shaped iron clamps. He sends the servant away now to fetch flowers, twice as many as usual and as few white ones as possible. And I think I've read some people reading something into this, that his days of innocence are completely gone now. In fact, I don't want any white ones. Can we read something into that? So the servant asks when he must be back. Dorian asks Alan how long the experiment will be, about 5 hours. So then Dorian tells the servant, it'll be time enough then if you're back at 7:30. And he changes his mind. Or stay at the country house. Just leave my things out for dressing. You can have the evening to yourself. I'm not dining at home, so I shall not want you. Thank you, sir. The servant leaves. They take the equipment upstairs. When they reached the top landing, Dorian took out the key and turned it in the lock. Then he stopped, and a troubled look came into his eyes. He shuddered. I don't think I can go in, Alan. It's nothing to me. I don't require you, said Campbell coldly. Half opens the door and he sees the portrait leering in the sunlight, leering like an ugly smile, a mocking, horrible smile in the sunlight. On the floor in front of it, the torn curtain was lying. He remembered that the night before he'd forgotten for the first time in his life to hide the fatal canvas. That's a nice phrase to remember when one is writing about this novel. And was about to rush forward when he drew back with a shudder. So he's about to rush forward to cover the painting. And then he stops for a second. Why? Because he sees another change in the painting. Now that he's a murderer, that's going to show bad on the painting. I should say badly. What was that loathsome red dew that gleamed, wet and glistening on one of the hands, as though the canvas had sweated blood? Ooh! How horrible it was! More horrible it seemed to him for the moment than the silent thing that he knew was stretched across the table. And it's going to be called a thing again before this chapter's over. The thing, and again, the thing whose grotesque or ugly and weird, whose grotesque misshapen shadow on the spotted carpet showed him that it had not stirred, it had not moved, but was still there as he had left it. So he wants to go and cover the painting again, but doesn't want to look at the body. So he goes in, determined that he would not look even once upon the dead man. Then stooping down and taking up the gold and purple hanging, he flung it right over the picture. Here's Alan Campbell bringing in the equipment. Alan Campbell says, leave me now. He turned and hurried out, just conscious that the dead man had been thrust back into the chair and that Campbell was gazing into a glistening yellow face. Dorian goes downstairs, and it's, I guess, about 5 hours when Campbell came back into the library. He was pale, but absolutely calm. I've done what you asked me to do, and now, goodbye. Let us never see each other again. You've saved me from ruin, Alan. I cannot forget that, said Dorian simply. As soon as Campbell had left, he went upstairs. There was a horrible smell of nitric acid in the room, but the thing that had been sitting at the table was gone. And of course, that thing was once Dorian's friend. So I guess once again, we're left with the idea he's sinking down to the lowest. I guess you can't do much worse than murder your friend, your loyal friend. But I guess Dorian's just going to go down, down, down from now. I hope you're finding the plot quite riveting now. This was 14. There's 6 chapters to go. And the interest level doesn't go down. So I hope to see you again in chapter 15.